Ladies and gentlemen, for the last few days, I have been regaling you with my journey blind. I've never seen anything about the game before. Final Fantasy 15, and I've been having the best time. An extraordinary time. And to the point where I was genuinely confused about why people had such a weird reception to this game. In many ways, it was almost an idyllic Final Fantasy game. It had horror, it had drama, it had all that kind of stuff, while mixed in with whimsy, chocobo races, all sorts of stupid things going on that were really silly and really fun, and the connection and dialogue between the guys was surprisingly good. The boy band meme was a big one, and this was not the case. These were actually written really well as tight-knit friends who had grown up together, who cared about each other, who weren't afraid to say, hey, cut your crap. All that kind of stuff was in there, and it was good. Things just changed. Things just changed, and obviously when you're playing blind, you don't know what's coming, and what actually happened didn't really dawn on me for about 6 hours, and then I was like, oh no. I actually think this has really gone in a different direction. So, usually what I like to do is sort of regale you with what's happened, so you can keep up to date of what's going on, and you can enjoy, you know, vicariously a playthrough through the game without having to invest so many hours, and it's an older game. So I'm going to do a little bit of that today, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the actual game systems of the game. Okay, so to get started, we had just reached Altissia. I said yesterday, what a beautiful, glorious place this is. One of the best introductions to a city I've ever seen. It's not quite Rapture, but it was beautiful. It was impractical and beautiful and everything I expect from Final Fantasy. My goal there was to meet Lunafreya, our bride-to-be. But before that, I had found an arena, and I didn't really know what it was about. We reached it as I finished my stream, so I went to start that off. And it turns out it's a fun gambling arena. Excellent. It's like, it's not the gold saucer, but it is somewhere you can gamble, and you can wager medals, and beasts will fight, and you get rankings and odds, and you have to make a choice, you have to make a bet. And if you win, you get some sort of payout off it, and if you lose all your money. And you have Vuvuzelas. If you're not sure what they are, they're the long plastic horns from the 2010 World Cup that will either do various things. They will heal them, they will give them a DPS buff, a defense buff, they will clear any conditions they've got on them, and you have to buy them. I was poor. I had 200 gil left in my pocket after investing so much into recipes and things like that, that I needed money. So first things first is I went to the hunt provider to get some quick cash, who gave me several hunts. This was fantastic. Having a great time. Not only did I get to fight Tomberries, finally got to fight some Tomberries, was so happy about that, but also got to fight the King Tomberry, or Master Tomberry, who was terrifying, and they had completely modeled it after Yoda from, I believe it's one of the prequels. I think it's the third one. Forgive me, I forget the names of those movies, where Yoda's like, and he's like jumping around with a lightsaber and all that kind of stuff. They completely modeled it on that. I thought it was great. It was fantastic. Every time a Tomberry turns up in an FF game, my heart fills with joy. That's why we have a stuffed Tomberry in the back, and somebody knitted me a Tomberry, which is at my home, actually. So thank you to that. I love Tomberries. And had a great time. Made a bunch of cash and spent it all on Vuvuzelas to buff my things. I was like, right, let's go and do some gambling. Because what I found is the rewards were really cool. There was a Magitech converter that does something to the car. There was superchargers. There was weapons. There was all kinds of things to get from these medals. So I spent the next, like, hour or so gambling. And once we learned who our favorites were, and the audience was cheering if we got a curl, because curls are, like, unstoppable. We learned the value of condition. We, like, made friends with Gigatoad. Gigatoad is a menace, an absolute menace. Or do we choose the giant strong elephant? But it started to run into some problems, because you need 3.6 million medals to get the Magitech converter. But it limits on how much you can gamble. You can only gamble 9999 at max. And you might get the problem. The only little problem with the system is it's kind of a foregone conclusion who's going to win in most cases, because you can assess who's going to win. So if you've got like a strong curl, it's going to annihilate everything. So you don't get those risks of massive payouts in order to sort of risk it. You don't get the chance of risk. Do I risk this and maybe get a huge payout? There's none of that. It's a very sort of deterministic system, which means there's a sort of deterministic time on getting 3.6 million. And as you can't bet more than, say, 10,000, and the best odds you're going to get, because the odds system does realize these are very strong, is you might get a 3.5 times payout at best. And that means you're going to be there for a few hours grinding up to 3.6 million. So we decided to leave that alone, but great fun and something to put on the schedule for later. It's like, we had fun with it, cheering for our guys. And then if we lost, it was kind of a bummer. But that was really fun. Once that was done, though, I had kind of done the side content of Altissia. So I was like, right, dudes, it's MSQ time. It's time to do the main story. Let's get going. Okay, this is where it takes a turn. What I didn't know, so the spoiler alert is, what I didn't know, that from this point on, which for me is still early in the game, we're about 22 hours into the game, but we haven't barely done any story. This would be the last time I would experience any form of open world whatsoever, as far as I can tell. And it was unbelievable that they made this choice. I am so baffled by it. And not only that, but the story really, really does not land, particularly with what's about to happen. So the idea of the story here was to wake Leviathan so that the Oracle Lunafreya can seek the blessing of Leviathan and empower us to become the chosen one, the king of light, etc., and put a stop to the darkness. Okay, usual Final Fantasy stuff. This happens cinematically, gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. But ultimately, as you can probably imagine, you end up in a fight with Leviathan. This has to be, and I don't say this with any form of exaggeration, one of the worst gameplay encounters I've ever experienced. And I've played some horrific games. This is truly awful. It's a simple case of standing still and pressing circle for about 6 minutes until Leviathan dies. And Leviathan doesn't even hit you. You just kind of fly. And the inspiration here for what they wanted from Final Fantasy 16 is so obvious of what they pictured in their mind, of what they wanted this to be, and they simply did not have the gameplay tools to make it happen. I genuinely am not laughing at this. I feel so sorry for the developers here, because they obviously tested this and were like, yeah, it looks great, and we've got the absolutely slapping music playing, we've got all that, but this is awful. It's so bad. And there's no real way of us fixing it, because the combat system I enjoy. It works. It has its flaws, which we've talked about in previous videos, but I'm kind of okay with it. But when it comes to these rapidly moving, large bosses, it just doesn't work. Like, the camera doesn't work, because the camera is constantly trying to find what you're looking for, and Leviathan is spinning around, and they, like, try and fix it with Warp Strike, which is essentially a charge. So you're like, oh, you're out of range because of the giant thing, so you can Warp Strike to it and get back into combat, right? You can, but all you end up with is a spinning, almost sickness-inducing camera, and you just can't do any attacks because they want you to be like the empowered king of the royal arms. It's just atrocious. And through it, I was just like, this is awful. And I feel so bad for the developers, because they obviously have the same issue with Titan. And from going forward, any fight with the Arcadian or the Firebringer, which is no doubt Ifrit, will be equally as bad, because they want the Final Fantasy 16 cinematic battles, which are incredible, and the strength of that game. And they just don't have the gameplay tools to achieve it. They can do it cinematically, because that's just animations, but they just can't pull it off gameplay-wise. And it's so disappointing and sad that they kind of resolve it in some ways with QTEs, but... And I don't forgive them for this. Their QTEs are still one button. So they have QTEs that are just press circle over and over again. It was really quite tragic. I felt bad for them, though. Story-wise, what's happening? Lunafreya gets killed. I think they really wanted this to be on the par with Aerith in Final Fantasy VII. And it is so undeserved, because Lunafreya, I'm sorry if you're a Lunafreya lover, is the most miserable, boring character I've ever seen. I even before this, not knowing she was going to die, we just called her Lady Plainface. Like, she's so boring all the time that her dying felt freeing. It's like, thank God I don't have to marry you. Jesus. And I'm not trying to be awful, but why would I care? I've never met her in game. Yet you keep showing me videos and cutscenes of, like, we grew up together as kids. Well, obviously there's no romance factor there. We were kids playing in a garden, flowers, and even as a kid, you were miserable. You're like, yes, I will empower you, King Noctis. You will find your path, and blah, 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 blah. Never met her in game. Never had any shared experience with her in any way, shape, or form in terms of what I've, as a player, have done. And then you're, like, playing this ridiculously dramatic music about her dying. I don't care. I really don't. The closest interaction I've had with Lunafreya is looking at her wedding dress through a window. how can I possibly have any emotional connection to a character that you just tell me about exists and sends me really miserably short messages via Space Dog? I don't know. But Lunafreya dies, didn't care. And from that point on, it just went on an unstoppable, inescapable story bonanza. And I didn't know this at the time. So I was along for the ride. We get a train to Tenebrae, get off at Tenebrae and just explore a mine. Ignis goes blind. This is one of the things I did know before we started playing FF15, because when it happened, even though I wasn't playing, people were talking about it a lot. It's like, oh my god, one of the characters goes blind, this guy called Ignis. So I knew that was going to happen. I had no context for it, and I didn't know how it was resolved. But I knew he was eventually going to go blind somewhere in the game. So that happens. And you have a moderately interesting deal where I do care about Ignis as a character, where he's lagging behind, he's slow now, because he can't see where he's going, he's got a cane, and the guys are moaning at you to keep up. Gameplay-wise, though, for me, it made way more sense just to run off and leave them to explore, and I'll catch up with the guys later, which is what I would say in real life. Now, I will say the game does give you an option of, like, asking Ignis to stay behind, or bring him with you. And I was like, no, come with us, dude, but I would say that in real life. But if I had to run up a mountain real quick and run back down again, I wouldn't expect a blind guy to do that. I don't think the blind guy would want to do that either. Like, I've got blind friends. They would be like, dude, you go and do it. I'm not doing it. And it would be fine. But you have a very constant harassment from the rest of the team. Like, hey, slow down. Let's stick together. Do this. It's like, it's just impractical. But I get the message they were trying to deliver, so it didn't bother me too much. And then, of course, Ignis learns to fight again and catch up again. It's a very brief period of time. It didn't bother me too much. We're then continuing on this train journey, because that's our only visit to Tenebrae, and then we're back on again. And we're on the most cursed train journey. This was worse than my trip to London to Final Fantasy FanFest, which had, like, a death involved in it. Like, it was... those of you who know, but I had an awful trip to London via train that took hours and hours and hours. It should be a 2-hour train drive that was just cursed the whole way. This was even more cursed than that. Not only were we stopped every few minutes because something had happened. We were attacked by demons. And I always get a name wrong. It's something like Tilia or something like that. She's the familiar of Lunafreya, but she's... I call her Genitals, because I can't remember the name. She turns out to be Shiva, which was great to see Shiva. That was wonderful, and she tells a wonderful backstory, which I believe now was added after the game. After the game came out, to give more context of her love affair with Ifrit, and his Ifrit's downfall as he got angry at people and destroyed everything, and the gods had to lock him up and the Six had to seal him away. That was really cool. That was really interesting. And we had some really good stuff with Ardyn manipulating our mind, where we obviously are trying to kill Prompto because he's using the same dialogue as Prompto. And this confused some people. I'll bring this up because the story itself wasn't bad. That's not my complaint. I actually thought the story was quite cool. I really liked how they'd written Prompto's dialogue as he would say it. So he's like, dude, what are you doing? No way, bro. But they had Ardyn speak it in Ardyn's inflections. And so it came across kind of odd and disjointed, which it was supposed to, because it is Prompto. And I thought that was done really, really well. Like, I liked it. I thought, oh god, it sounds weird and wrong. So to have Ardyn say, dude, why are you doing this? You know, with that sort of sultry, raspy voice, but it's Prompto's dialogue. That was cool as well. Oh, I'm attacking Prompto. Yeah, this is Prompto, isn't it?
What? Oh. Show yourself! Knocked. That son of a bitch.
Well, he called me buddy like Prompto did. I don't want to miss out any loot.
Come on, Knocked. You're scaring me. Seriously, man. Cut it out. It's not safe. Plus, you're causing a scene. Quit playing around, okay? You think this is funny? Dude, are you seriously trying to kill me? Why wouldn't I? I've got you now. What are you after, following me around this whole time? It's all your fault! What are you talking about? Do you really mean that, Knocked?
So I kind of enjoyed where we were on this train journey. But what I did notice is that chapters were just passing by. It was like chapter 7 done, 8, 9, 10. I was like, what the hell? We're like just finishing off chapters. And then they point out, and you can find it, the car is in the train. The regalia is back. So I'm thinking, oh, we're taking a train to a new zone, and we're getting the car out again, and we've got a whole new world to explore, which is very Final Fantasy. If you go back to near enough any of the older games, the big twist that often happens is there's an entirely new world. That happens so regularly. So you'll go up to a sky and then suddenly there's a whole new world to explore. Now you've got the airship and all that kind of stuff. Or the world turns bad, or you go under the world and Sid has dug a way down. It's like, hey, there's an entirely new map to explore. So that's what I was expecting. That is not what happens. So Biggs and Wedge drive the train. Great to see Biggs and Wedge back. That was cool. And ended up keep going. And then at some point, I realized we've been playing for 3 hours. And I'm like, what is going on? Because everything is starting to seem very final. Weirdly, because we're not there yet. Like, in terms of the game and the game I'm playing. I've got tons of stuff I want to do in the older game, in the beginnings of the game. I've got stuff I want to do in Altissia. But we're not getting any freedom. It'd be like in FF14 when you get the message like, hey, several cutscenes are going to play together back to back, so you should either clear some time or do this later. Without that warning, you don't get that warning, and essentially you become entirely railroaded from what is a relatively open world with loads of activities and people to meet and things to do and quirky characters and fun and side objectives and distractions and all the things you expect from an FF game. You become entirely railroaded into a corridor, an endless corridor that you can't escape from. Once you're there, you're going, and there's nothing you can do. You can't get out of it. And it's so distinctly different from the rest of the game. And I was so confused by this point because the regalia, once we arrived at our destination, gets destroyed. And they have like a sad cutscene of the car dying. And I'm like, what the car? Wait. And that's when it dawned on me, was like, I think we're at the end of the game. And people weren't spoiling it for me, but they were Pepe laughing at me. I'm like, are we at the end of the game? When did this happen? What is going on? Because we're also not that long into the game. I think Final Fantasy IV, which is very linear, was 24 hours of gameplay. I kind of just hit that at 15, and I look at like 12, and that was like 100 hours. And I'm like, are we at the end of the game? What's happening here? But it feels that way. What then proceeded to occur, as many who are aware if you've played this, but if you've not, I'm going to give you context for this, is the infamous Chapter 13. Now, I want to point out, I apparently had a worse experience than people had at launch, where they forced you to walk through this. Chapter 13 will stick in my brain for a long time. What is Chapter 13? I almost, this was a poor rip of Final Fantasy VII Remake, which a lot of people complained was like constant corridors. Yes, but it does that from the start. This game doesn't, so it's very out of place. Chapter 13, they strip you of all your weapons and abilities entirely. They strip you of the rest of the party. Prompto is kidnapped. Ignis and Gladio go in a different route, which you can swap to, but the way it says it is, do you want to do Noctis's route, which is normal mode, or do you want to go to Gladio and Ignis's route, which is easy mode? Now, what I figured, like they've done in 4 and 6 and 7, is that they, at some point, divide the party in two, and what you do is you control one of the parties as they make some sort of progress, and then you swap to the other party to get some other progress. Sometimes you even have to activate switches and things like that, which allow the other team to progress. Very Final Fantasy, very normal. That's not the case here. It's just a case of if you find Noctis' route a little bit too hard, then you can swap to Gladio and Ignis's, but you don't get to do them simultaneously. You will just do their route instead, and eventually meet Noctis later on. And if you swap back, you will do Noctis' route instead, and then meet the guys later on. What you can't do is like, okay, I'll do Noctis' bit, then I'll go and do Gladio and Ignis's bit. You can do that, obviously, in post-game. You can go back and replay it, but during the actual game itself, no, you can't do that. So I was like, this is strange. And now you have no weapons. So what they do is they give you the one ring, essentially, the Ring of Death, which now gives you 3 abilities. If you dodge, you will just do holy damage, which is really powerful. If you do a perfect dodge, it does loads of damage. If you can cast death, where you just stand and channel the ring and it just kills things. Or you can open a void rift to rip all the enemies that exist out of life itself and destroy them into an eternal void. And it will AoE everything in the room and just eradicate everything. And they just give you this ring instead for ages. And this whole thing is seemingly based on Resident Evil 2 because it's almost identical. It tries to scare you with horror things, so you walk over things and suddenly the creatures will go and grab you, but you just tap circle and they do no damage. And you even go to an underground facility like is below the mansion in Resident Evil 2, and it's almost laid out identical. I was expecting Ada Wong to show up, where you just upgrade keycards for 2 hours. Even running and sprinting and not being remotely afraid of this. And what's weird is they've done horror and atmosphere way better earlier in the game. Like the first dungeon with an underground mine shaft with spiders crawling on the ceiling was significantly better than whatever the hell this was. And you just end up running around looking for a terminal that goes, you have keycard level 2. Okay, go up to the next floor. Do the same again. You have keycard level 3. Go up to the next floor. Do the same again. Occasionally there'll be enemies. And then they also introduced, I assume based on Tyrant, is an enemy that constantly respawns from the shadows and attacks you. And then can disappear again and hunts you and stalks you. And if you kill it, it just comes back again. So I was like, this has been done to death and better in Resident Evil and in Dead Space. I believe it was Dead Space 1 that had you had to freeze it and kill it, the constantly regenerating enemy that constantly chased you. Same thing, done to death, but done badly here. And this goes on for 2 hours. You're just on your own with a Ring of Death. Eventually, they do give you a sword, but by then, you've mastered the Ring of Death, and the Ring of Death just annihilates everything. So why wouldn't you just use that? It annihilates massive demons that are supposed to be, like, blocking your way. I think they almost kind of wanted you to have a choice here. Is like you either kill things or you stealth, but you can just kill things in seconds, so... Why would you do it? Why would you stealth it when you can just run up and just... you're dead now. I win. It was miserable. It was absolutely miserable. To top it all off, they have a puzzle section at the end, which is so weak, where you, again, Resident Evil style, you have to activate terminals which open certain combinations. There's 3 terminals, A, B, C. A and C will open certain doors, A and B will open certain doors, B and C, but you can't have all 3 activated at the same time. And you have to just open the doors, and they give you a little grid showing which doors are open, and you're like, okay. This feels like something I did when I was 5, but sure. Let's keep going with this. Now, I'm going to just conclude the bit of the story that we're up to, because I have a choice to make. The finale of this is you get Prompto back. It turns out Prompto is a clone. I don't know why I would care. I really was like, and? So what? Like, he's like, can you accept me for who I am? Yeah, like, it makes no difference. It turns out I'm a Magitech clone. Like, right? But you're still you, right? They even ask you. He's like, yeah, I'm still me. I was like, okay, sure. Not quite Genova and Sephiroth, let's put it that way. So that was the kind of big reveal, and Ardyn's teasing you the whole way, and then it gets to the point where it's like, hey, Magic Space Dog will return you to any point in the past if you want things to do, which feels like very similar to every FF game. Is like, you're kind of at the end now, bizarrely. If you have things you want to go and do, now's the time. I also have rediscovered Prompto, which means Prompto's DLC is available. I will mention here very briefly, and I'm sorry for not going over it, I did Gladio's DLC. It was very fun. I enjoyed it. It was very edgy. The cup noodles thing was ridiculous, but a nice, fun little side thing to explain Gladio's edginess and test of will. I'm touching on it briefly, but it was nice to see Gilgamesh, Greg, and Enkidu again. It was fine. It was just a nice little side project to do, but I haven't got more to say on it, and that it was okay. But I've got Promptos to do now. He's been tortured and all kinds of things, so I'm kind of curious what happened to Prompto. Okay. The decision to do this, to just railroad the player, is so bizarre. And it's not just because of, like, it doesn't warn you it's going to happen. It's because it takes everything you've been doing, for at least me, for 20 hours, and just throws it all in the bin. Everything you've done matters not anymore. Let's talk about it. Leveling, cooking, and recipes. You no longer eat. I have spent probably a million plus gil on recipes, ingredients. I have ridden across the plains on chocobos. Chocobos are gone. All gone. I've upgraded the regalia. I've made it look pretty. I've done it what I like. It's gone. All the stuff I've done with Ignis and camping and excited about getting the food is all gone. It's removed from the game. Even the photography is back now, but it's pointless because we're just in corridors all the time. So that's gone. All the stuff you do with Nupss fishing, if you were to do that, which I haven't, is gone. Every single element of the game that has been drilled into you since the moment you start playing and have leveled up, explored, grown in strength, grown in power, all these things is just removed. And if I was to just do the MSQ alone, I'm pretty sure I would be here within like 5 hours. And another, probably, for a first time playthrough, not speedrunning here, probably another 5 hours to get where I am now. So, is this story like 10 hours long in a Final Fantasy game? Not only do you completely strip out all of these really fun Final Fantasy-esque elements, all the whimsy is gone. It's just turned into, like, sort of miserable, horrible things happening to your compadres. I don't know how I would have felt about any of these characters if I'd just done what a lot of people do, which is I'll do the main story and then I'll go and do side content later. I don't care about Lunafreya now. I care about the guys because I've done loads of stuff with them. I've done chocobo races against them. I've taught Ignis all these things. I've done sparring sessions with Gladio. I've had picture sessions all over the place with Prompto. I've done all those things that has built some repertoire with the guys, and I've listened to hours of dialogue between the guys, which has given me the affection I have for them. If I hadn't have done any of that, why would I care about any of these people at all? If I just done the story first and be like, okay, Prompto's a clone. Who? I don't know why it matters. And I got all these powers and royal arms and all. I've been and farmed all these royal arms, and I've got all this like cool armor, and I've got all these like wonderful magic spells. I've like got all these augments with Elemancy so that I can like make quadcast and tricast Thundaras and all this kind of stuff. And they just take that all away from you. Like, yeah, you don't have that anymore. You have the Ring of Death, like Emperor Ming. Woo! Emperor Ming. I am so baffled by this decision. I'm so baffled that a game would just switch gears. It went from mostly open world, Final Fantasy game, done almost perfectly. Almost perfectly. I will stand by that. Like, almost perfectly. To just forgetting that all exists, to a singular corridor that just will not let you off until hours later. Like, I'm sure there's a way of getting back by doing something, but it's clearly not what the game is trying to do. It's clearly not what it wants you to do. It just becomes the most linear, restrictive game for some reason, and I'm baffled by it. I'm baffled by it because, and also it seems incredibly short. Ardyn is the main antagonist, obviously. And Ardyn still hasn't really done anything. He's teased me and tricked me and done some mind games with me. That's what he's done. He hasn't really done anything. We're not talking about... We haven't had Kefka opening the cave and letting all the monsters run free on the espers and all that kind of stuff. We haven't had that. We haven't had the destruction of the world and we need to go back in time to fix it. We haven't done any of those things that happened. We haven't had Sephiroth kill Aerith, although that has happened. It's unearned, so nobody cares. We haven't had the creatures of Genova's experiments creeping around mansions and all that kind of stuff. We've done none of these things. Yet, they want us to hate Ardyn? I don't hate Ardyn. He hasn't really done anything. He's, what, made me fight some monsters? Like, dude, I've been doing that since the first day I arrived in Hammerhead. Like, that's no big deal. That's a nothing thing on a world apocalyptic scale. Like, but then I think people are going to say, but Mike, in Kingsglaive, Niflheim destroyed Lucis. That's not in the game. And I understand Kingsglaive should go along with the game. I get that. But we come down to an almost World of Warcraft-esque problem where things are happening in the game and it's like, well, you need this supplementary material to understand what's going on. And occasionally we will play cutscenes from the movie to try and bring you up to speed. But it's like, I've not experienced it as a player. And that's really important. I'm not giving up on this, because I still have... What's weird, though, is I still have loads to do, but I definitely see where people are coming from their criticism of Final Fantasy 15. I totally get it. And I'm going to keep going, because obviously I want a full... Considering my attitude to this game has switched so heavily in the last day, it may switch back. I don't know where this story goes. I don't know where it ends. We haven't seen Ifrit yet. Shiva has told us Ifrit is around. Shiva has granted us her blessing, so... I don't know. I don't know. What a bizarre twist, eh? And if you're watching this for the first time, you should check my first 4 videos where I was having the best time. All right, I'll update you again tomorrow. Bye, guys.